The air in the command center was cool and hummed with a low, purposeful energy, the sound of 100 machines and a dozen minds operating in tight synchronization. On the main screen, a lattice of light pulsed, a three-dimensional map of our digital borders. Little red tendrils kept probing, a persistent, sophisticated worm trying to find a crack in the firewall. It was elegant, almost beautiful in its complexity, a piece of malicious art. They're shifting to port 443, trying to blend with regular HTTPS traffic, I said, my voice calm, cutting through the focused silence. I didn't raise it often, but when I did, the room stilled. Chen, route all external secure comms through the Gibraltar node. I want a full packet inspection, no exceptions. Flag anything with a checksum variance above 0.01%. David Chen, my deputy, nodded, his fingers a blur on his own console. On it, Gibraltar node is live. Inspection protocols are max. They're getting nothing but a reflection of their own signature back. It's like they're shouting into a mirror. For the last 48 hours, we'd been playing this high-stakes game of digital cat and mouse. It wasn't a full-blown attack, it was a reconnaissance mission. Someone, somewhere, was testing our defenses, mapping our capabilities with the patience of a master jewel thief checking laser patterns. And we were the vault. They're persistent, I'll give them that, David muttered, not looking up from his screen. They're paid to be, I replied, my eyes tracking the flow of data. This is a pro, state level, probably testing the new asymmetric encryption we rolled out last month. I took a sip of cold coffee, the bitterness grounding me. They're looking for the seam, they won't find it. The double doors at the far end of the room hissed open, and a familiar, imposing figure filled the space. General John Jack Miller didn't need to say a word. His presence was a physical thing, a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. He walked over, standing just behind my shoulder, his hands clasped behind his back. He watched the main screen for a long minute, his gaze taking in the dancing red lines and the steady, unwavering blue of our defensive perimeter. "Status, Doc?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "We're good, sir," I said, still typing commands. "It's a probe, a very, very good one. They're using a modified version of the Cerberus toolkit, but we're several steps ahead. They've hit a honeypot we coded to look like a vulnerable logistics server. They're having a lovely time downloading fake deployment schedules for our troops in Antarctica." A rare, gruff smile touched the general's lips. "Let them plan for penguins. How long until they give up?" "Their last 3 attempts have lost sophistication. They're getting frustrated, making mistakes. I'd say another hour, maybe 2, and they'll cut their losses and slink back to wherever they came from. And we'll be watching the route they take home," David added. "Good." The general placed a heavy, paternal hand on my shoulder for a brief second. It was a gesture he reserved for moments like this, a wordless communication of trust and gratitude. "Outstanding work, Aaliyah, both of you. When this is wrapped up, I want a full briefing. And then I want you gone. You look like hell, Doc. Get some sleep." "Yes, sir." He lingered for another moment, a silent sentinel, then turned and left as quietly as he'd arrived. The pressure in the room eased by a fraction of a degree. An hour and 17 minutes later, the red tendrils on the screen withdrew, dissolving back into the void from whence they came. The immediate threat was over. The after-action reports would take days, but the fire was out. The team began the slow process of standing down, the adrenaline drain palpable. I stayed at my station until the last system was confirmed stable, then finally leaned back, the fatigue washing over me in a sudden, nauseating wave. My neck ached, my eyes felt gritty, and all I wanted was the profound silence of my own apartment. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I knew who it was before I even looked. Only one person would be calling my personal cell right now. I swiped to answer, cradling the phone against my shoulder. "I'm alive, Sophie." "That's a relative term from the sound of it," my sister's voice chirped, a blast of sunny concern through the line. "Did you eat, sleep, see the actual sun today?" "The sun is a myth perpetuated by the tourism industry. I had coffee, it has nutrients." I massaged my temples. "Ali," her tone shifted from teasing to gently admonishing. "You can't keep doing this. 48-hour shifts, it's not healthy." "It's my job." It was our oldest, most familiar argument. "I know it's important, I do, But you're 34, not a college kid pulling an all-nighter. You need a life outside that fortress you work in. I sighed, gathering my things. I have a life, it's a quiet life, I like quiet. Quiet is a synonym for lonely, and you know it, she countered, her empathy a sharp and accurate weapon. Which is why you're not canceling. A cold dread trickled down my spine. Canceling what? Dinner tonight, remember? Marcus, the lawyer I told you about, 7:30 at the Oak Room. The memory, buried under layers of code and threat analysis, surfaced with the unpleasantness of a forgotten dental appointment. She had mentioned it. I had grunted noncommittally, a tactic that had clearly failed. Sophie, no, I just spent 2 days fighting a cyber war. I smell like stale coffee and exhaustion. I can't go on a date. I especially can't go on a date at the Oak Room. People wear ties to that place. I don't own anything that doesn't have a hood. Which is exactly why you're going, she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. I already called in a favor and got you a reservation. It's all set. Just shower, put on that one black dress you own, and be charming. I'm not charming. I'm observant and tactically proficient. They are not the same skill set. Pretend it's a deep cover op. Your mission is to have a glass of wine and a conversation with a nice, successful man. You can do that for me. Please, Aaliyah, for my peace of mind. I closed my eyes. I could feel the weight of the last 2 days, the heavy mantle of my security clearance, the constant, low-grade hum of national vigilance that never truly left me. And underneath it all, a smaller, quieter voice that whispered she might be right. The silence in my apartment was waiting for me, and for the first time in a long time, the thought of it felt less like peace and more like a sentence. 1 glass of wine, I said, the words feeling like a surrender. 1. I could hear her triumphant smile through the phone. Perfect. He's nice, Ali, I promise. Just try to have fun. An hour later, I stood under a scalding shower, trying to wash the command center out of my pores. The black dress felt foreign against my skin, a costume. I ran a brush through my dark hair, leaving it down instead of in its practical ponytail, and applied a minimal amount of makeup, a pathetic attempt to cover the shadows under my eyes. I looked at my reflection. Dr. Aaliyah Vance, Chief of Cyber Defense for the most powerful military command on the planet, dressed for a dinner she didn't want to attend, about to lie about her entire existence. The Uber dropped me off in front of the Oak Room. The place reeked of old money and whispered deals. The lighting was low and expensive, the sound a muted symphony of clinking crystal and discreet conversation. A man in a suit that cost more than my car glided over. Reservation, he asked, his tone implying that I might be lost. Vance, I said. His demeanor changed instantly, a mask of obsequious warmth sliding into place. Ah, yes, Ms. Vance, right this way. General Miller's party is always welcome. I winced internally. Of course, the reservation was under Miller's name, a perk he'd insisted on after a previous incident where a maitre d' had tried to seat me by the kitchen. It was Jack's way of watching my back, but tonight it felt like a beacon. I was led to a quiet booth. A man was already there, standing as I approached. Marcus Thorne. He was exactly as Sophie had described. Tall, handsome in a polished, corporate way, with a confident smile and a suit that was, if possible, even more expensive than the maitre d's. His eyes did a quick, appraising sweep of me, and I saw the moment his assessment was complete. The black dress, while nice, was off the rack. My shoes were flat and practical. I carried a simple clutch, not a designer purse. I was pretty enough, his expression said, but clearly not in his league. The condescending smile was already warming up. Aaliyah, Marcus Thorne, it's a pleasure. He took my hand, his grip firm and perfunctory. Sophie didn't do you justice. I extracted my hand. She's generous that way. We sat, a waiter materialized. Marcus ordered a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc I knew from the menu was $120. I didn't argue. So, he said, leaning back and spreading his arms along the back of the booth, claiming his space. Sophie tells me you're in government work. That must be steady. It was my opening to elaborate, to give the barest hint of the truth. I opened my mouth and the lie came out smooth and practiced. It is. Admin support mostly. Paperwork. Keeping the gears turning. The phrase was so bland it was almost offensive. He nodded, a look of profound understanding on his face. Ah, the unsung heroes. It's a good foot in the door, though, a solid foundation. You have to start somewhere, right? The wine arrived. He tasted it with a comical seriousness, swishing it around his mouth before nodding his approval. The waiter filled our glasses. Marcus raised his. To new beginnings, he said. I clinked his glass, to steady employment. He launched into a monologue then, a well-rehearsed soliloquy about his own illustrious career trajectory. He name-dropped law firms and Fortune 500 clients. He talked about billable hours and partnership tracks. It was a recitation of a resume, a performance designed to impress. I took small sips of my wine and let him talk. My mind, trained to analyze patterns and find weaknesses, couldn't help but dissect his presentation. The confidence was a shield for a startling lack of curiosity. He had already categorized me, and the file was closed. My phone, face down on the table, vibrated once. A single, specific pulse. A priority one alert from the command center. My entire body went on alert, my senses sharpening, the fatigue vanishing. My eyes flicked to the phone for a fraction of a second. Marcus noticed. He misinterpreted it completely. Everything okay? Not a work emergency, I hope? He said the word work with a gentle, mocking sympathy. Don't worry, I'm sure they can manage the filing without you for one evening. The irony was so colossal it was almost sublime. Somewhere, a server was melting down or a new, more dangerous threat was emerging, and this man thought I was worried about a missing TPS report. I forced a smile, my mind already racing through possibilities. David was on duty. He could handle it. He'd only escalate if it was critical. No, it's fine, I said, my voice a little tight. Just a calendar reminder. He looked pleased, as if he'd successfully talked me down from a ledge. See, you have to learn to disconnect. It's key to avoiding burnout in those kinds of roles. You know, if you're looking for more challenging opportunities, I have connections at the Department of Commerce. I could put in a word. Get you out of admin purgatory. He was offering me a leg up. Me, the woman who had just spent her day outmaneuvering a foreign intelligence service. The woman whose personal commendation from the president was in a locked safe in my apartment. The sheer, unwitting audacity of it was breathtaking. I just nodded, taking a larger gulp of wine. I'll keep that in mind, thank you. The rest of the dinner was a study in surrealism. He talked about the importance of networking, of dressing for the job you want, of playing the game. Each piece of advice was another brick in the wall between my reality and his perception of it. I responded with monosyllables, my internal monologue a stark counterpoint to his prattle. He's talking about leveraging contacts for a promotion. I just leveraged a satellite array to bounce a cyberattack into the void. He's worried about the stock market dipping. I'm running threat analysis on a potential attack on the electrical grid. He thinks my world is small. He has no idea the weight of the world I actually carry. When the check came, he grabbed it with a flourish. I've got this, a thank you for a lovely evening. He signed the slip with a dramatic signature. The gesture was meant to be gallant, but it felt like being patted on the head. Outside, the cool night air was a relief, and Uber idled at the curb mine. He'd called his own a black town car. This was interesting, Aaliyah, he said, that condescending smile back in place. Really, we should do it again sometime. I'd love to hear more about your paperwork. He was being polite. We both knew there wouldn't be a second date. I had failed the audition for the role of Marcus Thorne's girlfriend. The thought filled me not with disappointment, but with a profound sense of liberation. Drive safely, I said, and slid into the back of my car without looking back. The moment I was alone, I grabbed my phone. The alert was from David. I dialed the secure line. He picked up on the first ring. Hey, date that bad, huh? Worse, what's the sitrep? False alarm. A server cluster in Tampa got a bit spicy. Overheated and started sending out garbage data that tripped a perimeter sensor. It's handled. Cooling fans are replaced. Now, back to the important stuff. How was the lawyer? I leaned my head against the cool window, watching the bright lights of the city blur past. He offered to get me a job at the Department of Commerce. There was a beat of silence on the other end, followed by a sputter of laughter that David tried and failed to suppress. He did not. He thought I was an administrative assistant. He gave me tips on climbing the corporate ladder. David's laughter died down, replaced by a familiar, gentle concern. Aaliyah, you have to stop doing that. You're not a secretary. You're a certified genius who saves the world before lunch. Why do you let these guys think you're nothing? It's easier, I said, the truth of it hollowing me out. The questions are easier. The expectations are lower. They see the dress and the quietness and they make their assumptions. Correcting them, it leads to more questions. Questions I can't answer. It leads to them looking at me differently. I sighed. It's just easier to be nobody. But you're not nobody, he said, his voice soft but firm. And don't you get tired of being lonely because it's easier? The car pulled up to my building. My stop. I'll see you tomorrow, Chen. Get some sleep, boss. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, silent, clean, and utterly still. I kicked off the uncomfortable shoes and peeled the dress off, leaving it in a heap on the floor. I pulled on an old, soft hoodie from MIT and a pair of sweatpants, the familiar fabric a comfort against my skin. The transformation was complete. The woman at the restaurant was gone. I walked through the living room, not turning on the main light. The glow from the city outside cast the room in shades of blue and shadow. My eyes went to the one piece of decor on the wall. It was a framed document, hidden behind a locked glass cover that was keyed to my thumbprint. It wasn't signed by the president, that one was in the safe, but by General Miller. The text was dense, filled with phrases like exceptional service and averted catastrophic disruption and singular expertise. The date and location were redacted. To anyone else, it would be a boring, official-looking memo. To me, it was a receipt for one of the worst weeks of my life, a week where I hadn't slept at all. I looked from the reflection of my tired face in the dark glass of the frame to the words behind it. The brilliant strategist, the respected leader, the woman who spoke in a quiet voice and made a room full of military officers fall silent. Then I looked at the heap of the black dress on the floor, the administrative assistant, the quiet date, the woman who was given career advice by a man who thought a challenging workday meant a difficult deposition. The disconnect between the two was a chasm, and tonight it felt vast and uncrossable. David's question echoed in the silence. Don't you get tired of being lonely? The answer, I realized, staring at the reflection of a woman torn between two worlds, was yes. The problem was, I had absolutely no idea how to be anything else. The mission was always there, waiting. And it always would be. I turned away from the commendation, from my reflection, and went to make a pot of coffee. Sleep, it seemed, was still a long way off. The hum of the server farm was my world, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the soles of my sneakers and into my bones. It was Tuesday, just past 500. The air was cool and tasted of ozone and recycled air. 3 weeks of relentless vigilance since the Gibraltar probe, and the piece had been a carefully constructed illusion. The clock on the main threat display wall, a massive bank of screens that showed the digital heartbeat of half the globe, ticked over. The illusion shattered. It started as a flicker, a single, anomalous spike in latency on a logistical supply chain network for a forward operating base in Jordan. Then another, a ghost-in-the-machine packet cascade in the power grid management system for a naval support facility in Bahrain. They were disparate, seemingly unconnected. To anyone else, it might have looked like a coincidence of aging infrastructure. My fingers were already flying across my keyboard, my personal terminal a nexus of command. David, you seeing this? My voice was low, a calm that belied the adrenaline starting to prickle at the base of my spine. His response came from 2 terminals down, his focus absolute. Seeing it, it's too clean, too many points of failure at once. Feels orchestrated. Orchestrated is a polite word for target practice, I muttered, pulling up a layered map of our network topography. The anomalies were blossoming like ugly, digital flowers, each one a potential fire. They're probing the seams, looking for the weak joint in the armor. The command center, usually a model of hushed, focused energy, began to shift. The pace quickened. The low murmur of voices became more urgent, clipped. Phones started ringing, not the soft internal chime, but the jarring, persistent ring of dedicated priority lines. A young lieutenant on the communications desk answered one, her face tightening as she listened. She caught my eye and mouthed 2 words, Bahrain, blackout. The real-world consequence landed in the pit of my stomach like a stone. This wasn't a probe. This was a multi-vector, coordinated assault. They weren't just mapping us anymore, they were trying to break things. Critical things. The double doors to the command center hissed open and General Miller strode in. He didn't need to ask for a status report. He read it in the set of our shoulders, in the frantic dance of data on the screens. He came to stand behind my chair, a solid, imposing presence. I could smell the faint, familiar scent of his aftershave, a clean, sharp smell that had come to mean situation. "Talk to me, Doc," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "It's a distributed denial of service, sir, but sophisticated," I said, my eyes never leaving my screens. "They're hitting power, logistics, and communications grids across the AOR simultaneously. It's a flood attack, but the packets are crafted. They're using the modified Cerberus toolkit again, but they've evolved it. It's faster, more aggressive. They're aiming for total infrastructure collapse. Objectives: to cripple operational readiness, to create chaos. It's a show of force." I pulled up the source trace, a tangled mess of spoofed IP addresses and zombie servers. They're bouncing the signal through a half-dozen neutral countries. It's going to take time to unravel. How much time? The general's question was quiet, but the weight of it was immense. Every second of delay meant another base on backup generators, another supply truck stuck in the desert, another communications blackout for a commander trying to talk to his troops. I finally turned to look at him. 72 hours, minimum, to contain it, not neutralize it. He held my gaze, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the sleep I'd already foregone, the weight of the decision. He gave a single, sharp nod. "You have whatever you need, make the call." I turned back to my console, my throat tight. "All right, people, you heard the general. This is it. I want a full-court press. Chen, you're on packet dissection and source validation. I want that origin point. Team Alpha, I need mitigation on the Bahrain grid, prioritize hospital and air control power. Team Beta, Jordanian logistics, get those convoys moving again. I want updates every 15 minutes. Move." The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine, code, and a low-grade, constant hum of panic I had to keep firmly locked down. My world shrunk to the glow of the monitors, the feel of the keyboard under my fingers, the voices of my team in my headset. We lived in the war room, our chairs becoming extensions of our bodies. Food was protein bars eaten with one hand while typing with the other. Sleep was a 10-minute power nap slumped over my desk, the hard plastic of the keyboard imprinting on my cheek. It was during one of those rare, quiet moments, the eye of the storm late on the second day, that my personal phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd ignored it a dozen times already, but a glance showed it was Sophie. A knot of guilt twisted beside the knot of anxiety. I slipped my headset off and walked to the relative quiet of the glass-walled briefing room adjacent to the main floor. "Soph," I said, my voice raspy from disuse and recycled air. "Ali, oh thank God, I've been calling for 2 days. Are you okay?" Her voice was laced with a concern so pure it was like a physical ache. "I'm fine, I'm just swamped at work." It was the lamest, most hollow excuse in the world, and we both knew it. "Swamped, Aaliyah, it's been 2 days. You didn't answer any texts. I was about to drive over to your apartment and break the door down. I don't know what I thought." The hurt was now edging into her voice, sharp and pointed. "I'm sorry, it's a really big project. A deadline came up." The words tasted like ash. I was lying to my sister, my anchor, with the bland, generic lies I used for everyone else. I could see David through the glass, his face illuminated by the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was fighting the same fire I was. He understood. Sophie never could. "A project," she repeated, her tone flat. "You know, for a cybersecurity person, you're remarkably hard to reach during a crisis. What kind of project requires a complete communications blackout?" "The kind that pays the bills," I said, the deflection weak even to my own ears. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, closing my eyes. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say I'm trying to stop a foreign power from turning out the lights on an entire region. I'm trying to keep people safe, and the pressure is so immense I can feel my own heartbeat in my teeth. But the words were classified. They were locked in a vault behind my ribs. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the sounds of her classroom in the background, the distant chatter of students. A normal life. "Fine," she said finally, the word clipped and final. "When your project is over, call me." The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the silence in the briefing room suddenly oppressive. I had just defended a digital frontier against a hostile state, and I had somehow lost ground with the one person who mattered most. The cost of this job was a ledger that never balanced. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and returned to the fray. There was no time for guilt. The storm was picking up again. Another wave of attacks was inbound, this time targeting desalination plants. The audacity of it, the sheer malevolent scope, fueled a cold fire in me. I pushed the hurt and exhaustion down, deep down, and let the analytical, problem-solving part of my brain take over entirely. It was David who finally cracked it. On the morning of the third day, his voice, hoarse but triumphant, cut through the fatigue. "Got it. Aaliyah, look at this. The packet's signature in the water plant attack. It's different. Sloppier. They got overconfident. I've isolated a routing node in Minsk they didn't bother to mask." We descended on his terminal, a group of ragged, exhausted warriors smelling of stale coffee and adrenaline. He was right. It was the thread. We pulled it, and the whole tapestry of the attack began to unravel. We traced it back, through Minsk, through a series of proxy servers in Prague, and finally to a known state-sponsored actor, a military unit we'd been tracking for years. We had them. Not just their methods, but their digital fingerprints. By 1900 on Thursday, the flood had been reduced to a trickle. The fires were out. The lights were back on. The massive screens on the wall showed a calm, steady green across the board. The silence that settled over the command center was heavy with exhaustion, but it was a victorious silence. General Miller came back in as we were running the final diagnostics. He looked almost as tired as we did. He listened to my final briefing, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on me. When I finished, he just nodded. "Hell of a job, Doc. Your team, hell of a job." He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Now, I mean it this time. Get out of here. Go see the sun. That's an order." The world outside the command center felt surreal. The air was different, smelled of rain and asphalt instead of ozone. The sky was a deep, twilight purple. I stood on the steps of the building, my bag slung over my shoulder, feeling hollowed out and strangely weightless. The adrenaline had receded, leaving a vast, echoing fatigue in its wake. I felt the vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Marcus Thorne. "So, I suppose I was so dazzlingly forgettable you've chosen to block me from your memory. A simple, 'not interested,' would suffice. Hope the cat-sitting crisis was resolved." I stared at the glowing screen, the casually condescending words swimming in my vision. A week ago, that tone would have irritated me. Now it felt like it was from another universe, a trivial, silly little universe where the biggest problem was a perceived slight on a date. It was normal. It was simple. It was everything my life wasn't. Before I could overthink it, before the crushing weight of the last 72 hours could fully settle onto my shoulders, I typed a reply, my thumbs clumsy with tiredness. "No crisis, just work, free for that drink now." He wrote back almost instantly, the blue note, 8 p.m. "See you there," I responded. It was a decision made not from desire, but from a desperate, clawing need to feel something other than the ghost of server hum and the acid burn of classified stress. I needed to prove to myself that Aaliyah Vance, the woman, still existed somewhere beneath Dr. Vance, the firewall. I went home, showered off the 3 days of command center, and put on jeans and a clean hoodie. I looked pale in the mirror, shadows like bruises under my eyes. I didn't care. The blue note was all dark wood and low lighting, the air thick with the smell of whiskey and jazz. I saw him before he saw me, sitting at the bar, looking effortlessly put together in a crisp button-down shirt. He smiled when he approached, a confident, easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Elijah, you made it. I was beginning to think you were a figment of my sister's imagination," he said, leaning in for a cheek kiss I awkwardly dodged. "Long week," I said, sliding onto the bar stool. It took a concentrated effort not to slump over the polished wood. "I'll bet, let me guess, another system migration. Server outage," he said, signaling the bartender. "What are you drinking? You look like you need it." "Bourbon neat." I needed the burn, something sharp and real, and something like that. He ordered himself a martini, dry. "You tech people, always putting out fires. I don't know how you do it. It seems so reactive. Don't you ever get the urge to do something more proactive? Ambitious?" I took a long sip of the bourbon, letting it warm a path down my throat. He had no idea. The ambition it took to build the defenses he would never see. The proactivity required to anticipate an attack he couldn't even conceive of. He saw a tired woman in a hoodie who worked in it. He saw the surface, and the surface was all he would ever care to look at. "It pays the bills," I said, repeating my empty line to Sophie, but it sounded even emptier here. "Right," he said, his smile condescending. "Well, here's to paying the bills." He clinked his martini glass against my whiskey glass. The sound was like a bell tolling. I was sitting in a nice bar with a handsome, successful man, and I had never felt more alone. The server hum was gone, but the silence it left behind was so much worse. The insistent buzz of my intercom cut through the low hum of my laptop's cooling fan. I frowned, my fingers pausing over the keyboard where I'd been annotating a particularly nasty piece of code David had flagged. It was Saturday night, and the only person who ever used the building's front desk line was Sophie, and she was supposed to be at some teachers' union dinner. I'd already deflected 3 texts from her today, each one a variation on "How are you really?" since our last phone call. I'd been short, buried under the ever-expanding shadow of the ongoing attacks. The blackout in Bahrain had been just the opening move. The last 2 weeks had been a relentless game of digital whack-a-mole, each suppressed flare-up more sophisticated than the last. I pushed back from my desk, the wheels of my chair rolling silently across the polished concrete floor. My apartment was my sanctuary, a minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a glittering, silent view of DC. It was sparsely decorated, a deliberate choice. Less to dust, less to distract. The only personal touches were a few well-stocked bookshelves and the small, discreet plaque from the dudie, its inscription heavily redacted with a black permanent marker, sitting on a high shelf. It was a relic from a past life. A thank you for a job so classified I could only discuss it in a SCIF, and I kept it more out of a sense of obligation than pride. I picked up the intercom handset. "Yes. Dr. Vance, there's a Ms. Sophie Vance here to see you." The security guard's voice was professionally neutral, but I caught the faintest undercurrent of tension. "She's not on the approved list for unscheduled visits." My stomach tightened. Sophie, here, of all the nights. I'd been so careful to keep my worlds separate, this fortified cage of national security and the warm, messy reality of my sister. She'd never just shown up before. The building's security protocol was absolute. No one got past the lobby without being on the pre-cleared list or without me physically escorting them. I'd always met her at cafes, at her apartment, never here. The fortress had just been breached by the one person it wasn't designed to keep out. "It's fine, Paul, she's my sister. I'll be right down." I slipped my feet into a pair of worn sneakers, not bothering to change out of my soft, gray hoodie and jeans. This was not how I'd planned to spend my evening. I had a date with Marcus and I glanced at the clock on the microwave. 45 minutes. Our third. The first 2 had been a study in polite endurance on my part. Dinners at achingly trendy restaurants where he held court, talking mergers and appellate cases, his confidence a solid, shiny thing. He asked what I did, and I'd given him my standard deflective answer. "I'm in it, network security, pretty boring, really." He'd taken it at face value, his eyes already glazing over, and launched into a story about a client's server farm. It was easier that way, safer. The elevator descended, its silent plunge a physical manifestation of my sinking feeling. The doors slid open to reveal the marble and steel lobby, a space designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. And there was Sophie, standing stiffly between 2 armed guards in dark uniforms. Paul, who I knew carried a sidearm under his tailored blazer, was speaking to her in a low, calm voice, but Sophie's posture was all bristling indignation. She was still in her teacher clothes, a smart blazer and slacks, but her arms were crossed and her face was flushed. "I'm telling you, I'm her sister," she was saying, her voice strained with a mix of frustration and bewilderment. "Since when does she need armed guards? This is insane." "Sophie," I said, my voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. She whirled around, her expression a torrent of relief and irritation. "Aaliyah, thank God. Will you please tell these gentlemen who I am? They acted like I was trying to storm the White House." I offered Paul a small, apologetic smile. "It's all right, Paul, she's with me. I'll add her to the list for future visits." He gave a curt nod. "Procedure, Dr. Vance, you understand." "I do, thank you." I turned to Sophie, whose eyes were wide, scanning me, then the guards, then the bulletproof glass of the front doors. Come on up. I was about to steer her toward the elevators when the main entrance hissed open. And of course, because the universe has a truly wicked sense of timing, Marcus Thorne walked in. He was early. Dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, he looked every inch the successful lawyer, a confident smile already on his face. That smile faltered for a microsecond as he took in the scene: the two armed guards, my flustered sister, and me in my decidedly non-date night hoodie. His eyes flickered from the guards to me, and I saw the quick recalculation happening behind his practiced composure. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice smooth, though a question lingered at the edges. "I hope I'm not interrupting." His gaze settled on Sophie, a polite, inquiring look on his face. "Marcus, you're early." The words came out flatter than I intended. I could feel the delicate walls of my compartmentalized life crumbling in real time. "This is my sister, Sophie. Sophie, this is Marcus." Sophie, still off balance, managed a tight smile. "Hi, nice to meet you. I was just surprising my sister." "Clearly," Marcus said, his lawyer's eyes missing nothing. He looked at the guards, then back at me, a new, assessing light in his gaze. The guards hadn't moved, their presence a silent, powerful testament to the fact that this was not a normal apartment building. "Everything okay?" he asked, directing the question to me with a new tone of deference I hadn't heard before. "It's fine," I said too quickly. "A misunderstanding with building security. Sophie wasn't on the list." I turned to Paul. "Marcus Thorne is my guest for this evening. He's cleared." "Of course, Dr. Vance," Paul said. And the title, spoken with such formality in front of both my sister and my date, seemed to hang in the air between us. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The jig was up. The carefully constructed facade of Aaliyah Vance, mildly boring IT specialist, was evaporating under the sterile lobby lights. There was no going back. "Why don't you both come upstairs?" I said, my voice steadier now. "We can talk there." The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was silent, thick with unspoken questions. Sophie stared at her reflection in the brushed steel doors, her arms still crossed. Marcus stood beside me, his usual relaxed posture replaced by a subtle tension. He was studying the elevator panel, the biometric scanner I had to use to access my floor, the sheer silence of the ascent. He was connecting dots, and I could almost hear the hum of his brain working overtime. I led them into my apartment. Sophie, who had never been here, stopped just inside the doorway, her eyes taking in the sweeping view of the city. "Wow, Aaliyah, you said your place had a view, but this is something else." Marcus walked in, his gaze sweeping the room with a professional appraisal. It was a look I recognized from our dates, the way he'd visually price a restaurant's fixtures or a competitor's watch. But this time, the appraisal was of my life. The expensive, minimalist furniture, the sophisticated but discreet tech, the absolute quiet. His eyes moved past the view, past the bookshelves filled with dense technical manuals and historical biographies, and then they stopped. They landed on the one thing I'd forgotten to hide. The plaque. It was small, made of dark walnut, with a simple brass plate. The Department of Defense seal was unmistakable. And below it, though most of the text was obscured by thick black marker, two words were left clearly visible: Dr. Aaliyah Vance. Marcus took a step closer, his well-polished shoes silent on the concrete. He stared at it, his back to me. I saw his shoulders stiffen. The arrogant set of his spine seemed to soften, just a little. Sophie, curious, drifted over to see what had captured his attention. "Department of Defense," she read aloud, her voice quiet with confusion. "Aaliyah, what is this?" Marcus turned around slowly. The condescending confidence he'd worn like a second skin was gone, replaced by a look of dawning, humiliated comprehension. He looked from the plaque to me, his eyes tracing the lines of my hoodie, my face, as if seeing me for the first time. The armed guards, the secure building, the penthouse, the plaque, it all clicked into place with a nearly audible snap. "You're not in it," he said, his voice low, stripped of its usual polished charm. It was a statement, not a question. I felt a surge of something powerful and unfamiliar. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear. It was a profound sense of relief. The weight of the secret, the constant editing of my own life, lifted. I met his gaze squarely. "No, Marcus, I'm not in it." Sophie looked between us, her brow furrowed. Then what? Aaliyah, what's going on? Why all the secrecy? I walked over to my kitchen island, leaning against the cool quartz surface. I was the calm center of this sudden storm. For the first time in weeks, since the attacks began, since the first awkward date, I felt completely in control. I'm the chief of cyber defense for U.S. Central Command, I said, the words feeling strangely liberating as they left my mouth. I hold a top-secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearance. My job is to prevent cyberattacks on military networks. The kind of attacks that can turn off a country's power grid or disrupt military operations in active combat zones. The silence in the room was absolute. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. CENTCOM? Like the Pentagon. Like the Pentagon, I confirmed, my eyes still on Marcus. The security isn't for show, Sophie. It's because the work I do makes me, and by extension anyone close to me, a target. That's why I couldn't tell you. The less you know, the safer you are. Marcus finally found his voice, but it was hollow, diminished. You told me it was boring. It's easier than the truth, I said, a hint of steel entering my tone. The truth involves explaining things I'm legally forbidden to discuss. The truth involves watching people's eyes glaze over, or worse, look at me with a kind of morbid curiosity. It's not a conversation starter, Marcus. It's a conversation ender. And with you, I paused, choosing my words with the same precision I used to dissect malicious code. With you, I saw how you sized people up. Their jobs, their status, their utility. I knew exactly how you'd categorize me if I told you the truth. You'd either see me as a fascinating trophy or an intimidating problem. I didn't want to be either. I just wanted to be a woman on a date. He flinched as if I'd struck him. The arrogance had completely crumbled now, leaving behind a raw embarrassment. He had built his entire worldview on a hierarchy of success, and he had just discovered that the woman he'd patronizingly categorized as a mid-level tech worker was operating on a playing field he couldn't even comprehend. I had no idea, he stammered. The way you downplayed it, I just thought. You thought what? I prompted, my voice gentle but firm. That I was a simple girl with a simple job, that my world was small. He had no answer. He just stood there, a successful man rendered speechless, his confidence shattered by the revelation of a reality he'd been too smug to see. Sophie finally broke the silence, her voice soft. All those times you canceled plans, the late nights, you said it was server migrations. Sometimes it was, I said, turning to her, my expression softening. But sometimes it was because a foreign intelligence service was trying to hack a drone feed over Syria. Sometimes it was because I was in a bunker under this city, helping coordinate a response to an attack on a naval base. I wanted to tell you, Soph. I hated lying to you, but the rules are there for a reason. I looked back at Marcus. The date was clearly over before it had begun. The dynamic between us had irrevocably shifted. He wasn't my antagonist anymore. He was just a man who had profoundly misjudged the situation, a catalyst who had accidentally forced the truth into the light. I think you should go, Marcus, I said quietly. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. He looked small. Yes, of course. I'm sorry, Aaliyah. I know, I said. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the spacious apartment. Sophie was still staring at me, her expression a whirlwind of emotions, shock, concern, pride, and a little hurt. A cyber soldier, she whispered. My big sister is a cyber soldier. I let out a long, slow breath, the last of the tension leaving my body. The secret was out. The wall was down. And for the first time in a long time, standing in the quiet of my apartment with the truth hanging in the air between me and my sister, I felt not like a fraud, but like myself. Dr. Aaliyah Vance, and it was enough. The hum of the espresso machine was a low, steady thrum against my temples, a welcome change from the sterile silence of my apartment or the aggressive buzz of the command center. Sunday morning light, weak and pale, streamed through the large window of the corner coffee shop, catching on dust motes dancing in the air. Sophie sat across from me, cradling her oversized mug of chai latte, her eyes, the same shade of hazel as mine, but always so much brighter, fixed on my face. I'd spent the night on her couch. After the jarring breach of my sanctuary, the thought of returning to those empty, echoing rooms was unbearable. The conversation downstairs had been stilted, a series of my clipped answers and her wounded silences. But the offer of her spare room, the smell of her familiar lavender-scented laundry detergent on the sheets, had been a lifeline. This morning, over coffee, was the real reckoning. "You were really going to just let me stand there," she said, not as an accusation, but with a soft, sad curiosity. "In the lobby, with Gary giving me the stink eye. You were going to turn me away." I traced the rim of my black coffee with a finger. "It's not about you, Soph." "Then what is it about, Aaliyah? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels a lot like it's about pushing me away, about pushing everyone away." She leaned forward, her voice dropping even though the shop was nearly empty. "I know your job is big, I get that. But this," she gestured vaguely, encompassing my building, my secrecy, my entire guarded existence. "This is a whole other level. It's like you've built a fortress around yourself and you've forgotten how to lower the drawbridge." I took a slow sip of coffee, the bitter liquid grounding me. For 3 years since I'd taken the CENTCOM post, I'd maintained this wall. It was necessary. It was safe. But looking at my sister's concerned face, the wall felt less like protection and more like a prison of my own making. The weight of the last 3 weeks, the escalating attacks, the sleepless nights, the condescending smirk of Marcus Thorne, pressed down on me. The need for someone, just one person outside the classified bubble, to truly see the pressure, became a physical ache. "Do you remember," I began, my voice quiet, "after Mom and Dad, when I was applying for my first security clearance?" Sophie nodded, her expression softening. "You were a nightmare, so paranoid. You de-shred grocery receipts." A faint smile touched my lips. It felt like a test. Every part of my life, every person I knew was under a microscope, and I passed. I got the clearance. And then I got another and another, each one deeper, each one requiring more compartmentalization. I looked out the window at the quiet street. My work isn't just a job, it's a target. The things I know, the systems I protect, if the wrong people knew who I was, where I lived, who my family was. I let the sentence hang, meeting her gaze again. "You're a history teacher. You know what happens to the loved ones of high-value targets in a conflict." Her breath caught slightly. "Aaliyah. The blackout in Bahrain 3 weeks ago?" I continued, the professional calm I wore like armor seeping into my tone. "That was the opening move. Since then, it's been a constant barrage. Every day, a new probe, a new attack, more sophisticated than the last. I haven't had a full night's sleep since it started. My team hasn't. We're playing a game of high-stakes chess against an opponent we can't always see, and the board is the entire region's critical infrastructure." I paused, choosing my next words with extreme care, walking the tightrope between disclosure and violation of the Espionage Act. "The reason I was so on edge last night, the reason my building has a former Marine with the demeanor of a brick wall at the front desk, is because my focus can't break. Not for a second. If it does, our people could die. It's not melodrama. It's the math of the situation." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, but they weren't tears of pity or fear. They were tears of understanding. "Oh, Lydia, all this time, I thought you were just being the brilliant, anti-social big sister. I thought you were embarrassed by us, by me." The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. "No, God, no, Sophie, never." I reached across the table and took her hand. It was warm from the mug. "You're my anchor. You're the only part of my life that feels normal, that feels real. That's why I have to keep you separate. To keep you safe. To keep that part of me safe." She squeezed my hand, her teacher's patience finally seeing the full lesson plan. "So the admin work for the Department of Defense." "A necessary fiction," I admitted. "A boring cover for a very unboring reality." "And Marcus," she asked gently, "was that part of the cover too?" I withdrew my hand, picking up my coffee again. "Marcus was a mistake of a different kind. I think I wanted a version of normal so badly that I thought I could force it. I thought if I could just pass for a normal, successful 34-year-old on a date with a normal, successful 36-year-old lawyer, maybe I could believe it myself." "And he was a jerk about the admin work," Sophie stated, her protective instincts flaring. "He was," I said, the memory of his condescension now feeling distant, almost academic. "He saw the hoodie, the lack of a fancy title, and he made a quick, surface-level judgment. He values the appearance of success. I value the reality of it. It was a fundamental mismatch." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the air between us cleared of the static that had plagued it for years. The fortress drawbridge was creaking open, and surprisingly, the world hadn't ended. "Okay," Sophie said finally, a determined look on her face. "New rules. You don't have to tell me what you're doing, but you have to tell me how you're doing. No more radio silence. If you're drowning, you call me. I don't care if it's 3 a.m., I'll bring over bad wine and we'll watch terrible reality TV until you can breathe again. Deal." A genuine smile, the first one that felt real in weeks, broke across my face. Deal. Back at my apartment, the silence felt different. Less oppressive, more like quiet. The place was still a sanctuary, but now it felt like a choice, not a prison sentence. I booted up my personal laptop, the civilian one, and saw the notification icon for my rarely used personal email. Among the newsletters and store promotions was a name that made me pause: Marcus Thorne. I almost deleted it unread. The catharsis with Sophie had felt like closure. But curiosity, that most fundamental driver of my professional life, got the better of me. I clicked it open. "Dr. Vance, I hope this email finds you well, and I apologize for the intrusion on a Sunday. I've reflected a great deal on our conversation yesterday and my behavior, and I feel compelled to reach out. My assumption regarding your work was presumptuous and, as it turns out, profoundly incorrect. A mutual acquaintance, who clearly knows you far better than I do, gently pointed out that my perception of achievement is rather narrowly defined. He mentioned, in the vaguest of terms, that your contributions are of a significance I evidently cannot comprehend. I am a man who prides himself on his judgment, and it is a humbling experience to have it so thoroughly exposed as flawed. The admin work comment was condescending and unworthy of you. You were clearly assessing me with a depth of perception I failed to reciprocate. I am sorry. I hope you can accept this apology. Sincerely, Marcus." I read it twice. It was well written, of course. He was a lawyer. The phrasing was careful, respectful, and carried the distinct tone of someone who had genuinely been taken down a peg. The mutual acquaintance had to be David. He'd been itching to give someone an earful about the pompous lawyer. A week ago, this email might have felt like a victory. Now, it just felt like data. It confirmed that his arrogance was based on a shallow worldview, one that could be corrected with new information. It wasn't malice, just a profound lack of imagination. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I showered, changed into jeans and a fresh hoodie, and drove to the command center. Sunday or not, the watch floor never slept. The air in the CENTCOM command center was its own unique ecosystem, cool, dry, and humming with a low-grade energy that was part concentration, part latent urgency. Large screens displayed data flows and global maps, their light reflecting off the focused faces of analysts. David looked up from his station as I approached, a grin spreading across his face. "Look what the cat dragged in," he said, pushing his rolling chair back from the console. "I hear you had an interesting Saturday night. Something about a sister, a confused doorman, and a dramatic lobby confrontation." "Your intelligence network is disturbingly efficient," I said, slipping into the chair next to him. "I have my sources," he said with a wink. "Mostly, Sophie texted me this morning to say you two had a good talk. I figured the world wasn't ending, so mission accomplished. Also, I may have taken the liberty of enlightening a certain corporate attorney." "I saw the email. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, his tone turning serious. "The guy needed to know he was in the ring with a heavyweight and he was judging you on your warm-up clothes. It was a public service." He nudged my arm. "So, how are you, really?" Before I could answer, a familiar, gruff voice cut through the ambient noise. "Vance, my office." General Miller stood in the doorway of his glass-walled office, his expression unreadable. My stomach tightened instinctively. A summons to the general's office on a Sunday rarely preceded good news. David gave me a look of solidarity as I stood and walked across the floor, the eyes of a few junior analysts following me. I stepped inside, and he closed the door, muting the sounds of the command center. "Sir," I said, standing at attention out of habit. "At ease, doctor," he said, rounding his desk. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it, arms crossed, and fixed me with that steady, paternal gaze. "Chen briefed me on the attempted breach of your residence last night." I felt a flush of heat. Sir, it was my sister, it was a personal matter. It won't happen again. I've reinforced the protocols with her. I'm not talking about the protocols, Aaliyah, he said, his voice softer than I expected. Gary filed his report. He said you were visibly rattled. He said you looked cornered. I looked down at the speckled gray carpet, unable to hold his gaze. The general saw everything. He was a strategist. Human terrain was just another battlefield to map. The pressure of the last few weeks is immense, he continued. I know that, I feel it too, but this job, it consumes you if you let it. It requires you to wall off huge parts of yourself. The part that has a family, the part that needs a life. He paused, letting the words sink in. What I want to know is, are you handling it, or is it handling you? I looked up, meeting his eyes. The concern there was real, the same protectiveness he'd shown me since the day I'd briefed him as a nervous new hire and he'd seen past my age and my hoodie to the competence beneath. I thought of my conversation with Sophie, of the drawbridge lowering. I'm integrating, sir, I said, and the truth of the statement resonated deep within me. It's a work in progress, but last night, it forced a conversation that was long overdue. I think I'm better for it. A slow smile spread across General Miller's face. Good, that's what I wanted to hear. Your work here has been exemplary, Aaliyah. Brilliant, even, but I need a whole person commanding my cyber division, not a ghost. A ghost burns out, a whole person endures. He pushed off the desk and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. Now, get out there. The Gray Fox campaign is getting frisky again. They're probing the power grid in Jordan. Let's show them why that's a bad idea. For the next several hours, I was completely in my element. The familiar rhythm of analysis and response was a kind of meditation. I directed my team, deployed countermeasures, patched vulnerabilities, my mind clicking through the logic puzzles with a clarity that felt renewed. The weight was still there, the responsibility immense, but it no longer felt like it was crushing me. It felt like a purpose I was choosing to carry. As the evening shift began to trickle in, I finally stepped back from the console. My back ached and my eyes were dry, but there was a deep, satisfying hum of accomplishment running through me. I walked across the command center to grab a bottle of water, and as I did, I passed a cluster of analysts. Good work today, Dr. Vance, one of them, a young woman named Rebecca, said with a respectful nod. You too, Rebecca. Your pattern recognition on that last packet flood was sharp. She beamed, and the others nodded in agreement. It wasn't deference out of obligation, it was respect earned in the trenches of ones and zeros. They saw the admin support cover, sure. But in this room, they saw the commander, too. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace with being both. Back at my desk, I opened my personal laptop again. Marcus's email was still open. I clicked reply and began to type, my fingers moving with a certainty that had been absent before. Marcus, thank you for your email. I appreciate the reflection behind it. You're correct that we operate on different metrics of success. My work requires a certain discretion, and the value of it is measured in stability and security, not billable hours or professional accolades. I can understand how that would be difficult to grasp from the outside. I accept your apology. I think the fundamental miscalculation was mine, attempting to fit a square peg into a round hole. I went on that date seeking a validation I should have found within myself. I'm not closing the door, but any further interaction would need to be built on a foundation of mutual respect, without preconceived notions. The person in the hoodie is the real me, and my achievements, whatever they may be, are my own to define. Best. Aaliyah. I read it over once, then hit send. It was firm, honest, and left the ball squarely in his court, on my terms. There was no anger in it, no desire to prove a point. It was simply a statement of fact. I shut down the laptop, the screen going black. The command center was quieting down, the night shift settling in. I grabbed my go bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out into the cool night air. The stars were out, pinpricks of light in the vast, dark sky. For the first time in 3 weeks, in 3 years perhaps, I felt a sense of integration. The brilliant cyber defender, the private sister, the woman who sometimes wanted a simple, quiet life, they weren't warring factions anymore. They were just parts of a whole. I got into my car, the leather seat cool against my back, and drove home, not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet contentment. The fortress gates were open, and I was no longer just the guard. I was also the citizen, finally free to come and go as I pleased.